Hello. Thank you for joining this session of our HR in Half an Hour webinar series. We're grateful to welcome Kathy Eppright from Andre Morris and Buttery. Kathy is going to cover 30 wage and hour tips in just 30 minutes. With so much content, this will be fast-paced, so it's maybe one you want to revisit. So with that, by early next week, a recording will be emailed to anyone who registered for this webinar. Plus, we have all of them posted on our Morris and Garantano website. So Kathy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I am going to run through in rapid succession 30 tips. And I've ordered these, or I put them in a kind of chronology starting from the beginning of employment to the end generally. And I've taken these, or I've come up with these based on my experience recently, in particular on the lawsuits that get filed in the area of wage and hour, which, by the way, is what everybody is suing for. So this is good timing. All right, so here we go. 1, make most of your employees non-exempt. So if you've never considered really the classification of your employees, now is the time to do that. California has moved in the direction of wanting to have people be paid by the hour and get paid overtime and get their rest and meal breaks, et cetera. So there is hostility towards exemptions. So if there is any doubt that someone doesn't qualify for the exemption, be safe and just classify them as non-exempt and pay the hourly rate, keep the time cards, and pay overtime. 2, state your pay rate in the written offer. Give a written offer, no matter what the position is. Put it in writing and give it to the person and state what the pay rate is going to be. 3, have an employee handbook. Even if you are extremely small, you should have an employee handbook with basic policies in place. 4, post the applicable wage order. So if you don't know what wage order applies to your business, there is a great little tool that's available on the DIR website for determining your wage order. Use that tool, determine what wage order applies to you, and then my advice is to post it where you put the other posters, because your wage order is not going to be on the posters that you buy from Chamber or from Morris and Gaetano or whoever you get your posters from. And the benefit of having it up there is it has the language in there about rest and meal breaks. So it's a great little backup if you ever have an issue. 5, use the 2810.5 form when you're hiring. So it's a form, if you've never heard that, if that's the first you've ever heard about a 2810.5 form, you can Google it and it'll come up, and it's a pre-printed form that the state would like you to use that has the basic information that you should be giving all your employees. 6, use time cards. I'm surprised how many people do not use time cards and have people just email them or even text them their hours. You need to be using a time card if you are not. Have the employees review and sign their time cards every pay period. It's best if it's in their own handwriting, but a lot of people use apps. That's fine too. But have it printed out or something. Have them acknowledge that they have, that what they're putting down is their accurate information that they are affirming. Then 8, you review every time card every pay period, or someone in your company does. That sounds like a pain, but it's really important. And when I say review the time cards, what I'm saying is look for anomalies. Look for things that maybe don't make sense. Look for something that they have not filled in. Look for missed meal breaks, things like that. 9, question anomalies. So if you're noticing that somebody is clocking out for their meal break at 12 o'clock and then clocking back in at 12:25, don't just let it go. It sits like a cancer in your records. That's a missed meal break, even though it's only 5 minutes. So you question it, meaning you go to the person and say, I noticed that, you've clocked in at 12:25 the last couple of days. Is there something happening that's causing you to not take your full 30 minutes? And if they say, oh, no, that's just because I just wasn't keeping track of time, then you document that you talked to that person and this is what they said. It's best to have the person write in their own handwriting why there was a mistake on their time card. It may not be feasible for you to get a handwritten note every time, Email is fine too if it's coming from them. You want some record that they are telling you this is what happened and why. 11, let people work through their breaks now and then. I'm always surprised at how panicky people get and say, I have an employee that missed a meal break and I'm mad. Don't be mad. Pay the missed meal break premium. Put it in their pay stub, even if they don't even draw your attention to it. Just put it in their pay stub, meal break premium. And it is 1 hour of their pay at their regular rate. The reason I say that is because it's great insurance. I just had a mediation yesterday where the employee was saying she never got her meal breaks and she was always having to work through them and that kind of thing. And she got paid missed break premiums. Anytime she reported a missed meal break or recorded one, she got paid a missed break premium. It ended the discussion about it. If there is a disagreement about something relating to somebody's time card or their hours that they're working, don't deal with the disagreement in their pay. In other words, you may be mad someone worked overtime without getting approval. Pay the overtime and then address the performance issue. It's a performance issue, not a pay issue. You pay the overtime and you deal with the performance issue. Same thing with missed breaks. If somebody, keeps accidentally clocking back in too early, treat it as a missed break and pay the missed break premium, but document that they told you they did it by mistake. They weren't paying attention. You document what they told you, but pay the missed break premium. Then give written direction. You'll notice on this slide, direction is underlined because it's very tricky to deal with these pay issues and not run into a trap where someone says, well, I got disciplined for it, and now I felt afraid to report a missed break premium. A missed break. Instead, give written direction. So after they tell you, I just lost track of time, you send them an email or you give them a memo and you say, I just want to remind you of our policy. Another copy of it is attached. We encourage our employees to take the full 30 minutes. We understand that the last couple of days you've just lost track of time. Of course, that happens, but we want you to not be working during your meal break, any portion of your meal break. And we're asking you to keep better track of your time, something like that. If it happens again, you give a second written direction. This is the second, and you can say that this is the second time we've noticed. Last week we addressed it with you and you said you were going to pay closer attention, and Thursday it happened again. It is important. This is an important value and policy of the company. So therefore, we're reminding you again that this needs to be something that you pay attention to. If it happens repeatedly, eventually you need to terminate. And I think terminating without giving them that teed up, like if it happens again, we will fire you. Your policy should already say compliance is mandatory, and if you fail to, it could lead to discipline. If you've given one written direction, a second written direction, and the person still can't seem to get it, then you just terminate them. And I know that sounds harsh, but it is a red flag. There are people who are very well schooled in how the system works, who work for a short period of time and then bring a claim or a lawsuit. So I would not tolerate repeated payroll and time card errors. But be careful that your documentation does not support an argument that the employee was being punished for reporting overtime or missed breaks. So you've got to make sure that there's nothing in your documentation to them that says, we don't want people working overtime. Make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the kind of thing that can be interpreted as really saying, don't report it. Think ahead about proof. Like right now, think about what may be in your workplace that you could rely upon if someone later falsely claims that they were workaholics and they were never able to, that everybody was putting all the work on them and they couldn't take a break, or they had to work overtime, but they were afraid to report it. That can be coworkers. So think about, if you have people, like I have a client that's a construction company, they have their crews take their breaks together. It's more efficient that way, and it also gives them, support from other people who are going to say, what are you talking about? He always took his break with us at noon. We did it like clockwork. We'd walk over to the 7-Eleven. Also, I have recordings here because there are so many premise properties now that have surveillance recording. And the reason why I'm asking you to think about it now is because what I have found is that people don't know what the settings are on those devices or their services. And I find most of them by default record over the recordings every 24 hours by default. So if you have recordings and cameras on site, at least look to see how long are you able to retain the recordings without it being, onerous or super expensive. A lot of times that default just gets set and nobody even pays attention to it until the day comes that somebody wants to find something on the recording and they find it's gone. I had a client learn that the hard way because they had an issue. They called me. I said, did you look at the recording? They said, yes, the recording clearly shows that what the person is saying is not true. I said, okay, go back and make sure you preserve that recording. And they called me and said it got recorded over because it was set as a 24-hour recording. So I always bring that up. 18, watch for people in the office during breaks. So if you work or in the workplace, if you notice that there is somebody that is always kind of coming in early or sitting at their desk when everybody else is at lunch, or they always staying late doing things on their desk, watch for it and then say something and document that you did. So I'll give you an illustration of how that would happen. You see somebody sitting at their desk at lunch and you say, aren't you going to lunch? I like to take my lunch at my desk and do, some personal things on my computer. Okay. When you get back from lunch, send an email that says, I just want to remind you that you are free to leave the office to go to lunch. I understand when I talked to you today that you like to sit at your desk and work on your computer, but I want to make sure that that doesn't turn into working during your lunch hour. So don't answer the phones. If someone comes up and tries to, work with you on something, you're to tell them that you're on your meal break. Now you've got documentation that they told you they weren't doing any work, and you told them to take their breaks and not work. Watch for early arrivals and late departures. A lot of times those are the people that later say that they were coming in early because it was just too hard to get all their work done between the 8 hours that they had. So when you see an early arrival, say, what are you doing here so early? And if they tell you, well, I like to get things kind of organized and set up before the day begins, then you tell them, you give them written direction. I appreciate that you're trying to be diligent, but your work time starts at 8 o'clock, not at 7:45. And then you pay the overtime for that time period. And if you discover they've been doing it for a while, sit down with them and find out how long they've been doing that and pay the back pay. So that's number 21. Say something and then document it. Train your managers. Your managers are your liability. They are your agents, and they tend to cause problems. They tend to be the ones that say things that they shouldn't say. Like I had a client who had a manager that told people that would be it was a kind of laborer outdoor kind of business. And this guy would walk by people sitting under the tree and say, what are you doing? Get up. Rest. Breaks are for wimps. That's what witnesses said he would say to these workers that were trying to take their mandatory rest breaks. So you need to train your managers and then document that you did your training. That documentation will help you if you do end up getting what's called a PAGA notice, a private attorney general's notice. That's a notice that's a precursor to a lawsuit to recover penalties for violations of the labor code. There is now an opportunity to get a discount of any penalties that might be assessed if you can show that you had compliant policies that you trained your managers and that you have documentation of that training. Cover the dues. In other words, when you're talking to the managers, tell them what they are to do. Make sure people are accurately recording their time. Making sure people are taking their breaks, making sure people are reporting overtime if they're staying late, and reporting their missed breaks. And then also cover the don'ts. Tell them. I know it might be tempting if Kathy is sitting at her desk working through her meal break to say, hey, can you just, send this off to somebody? But they're not to interrupt people's breaks. And don't say to people that they can't work overtime. Don't say our company doesn't pay overtime or we don't approve overtime. You say you need to get approval in advance and you should be able to get everything done during your work time. And if you can't, then come talk to me. Same thing with not directing people to work through their breaks. And of course, it's hard to believe you have to tell people this, but you tell your managers, do not threaten the employees with respect to anything related to wage and hour. If they are worried that someone's taking advantage of the company by how they're recording their time, then they should come to you and you should figure out the best way to approach it. But they should not be threatening anybody and saying, we're going to fire you if you don't, if you keep reporting missed breaks or something like that. Do not round overtime. It used to be acceptable, but now that we have a system in place, we have a lot of programs in place that can capture to the minute. Rounding is not permitted anymore. So you should be determining your time and the pay that you owe based on the exact time that people record their starts and stops. I suggest you use a payroll service if you can, and here's why. I had a case just last year where the HR did payroll internally and they would hand calculate overtime. And when we did an audit after they got sued, we did an audit of the person's payroll, and we determined that every pay period she was off overtime, sometimes in favor of the employee, but sometimes underpaying overtime because of how she calculated it. And it ended up, the net over a couple of years was something like, I don't know, $5,000. It wasn't very much money, but it was enough to be able to support a lawsuit and claim penalties and attorney's fees. So when I talked to our expert who did the analysis, he said, I find that people that do payroll internally tend to miscalculate the overtime if they're doing it by hand. So I'm starting to tell my clients, just use a payroll service if it's not too expensive for you, if you can afford it. 27, use policies published by a credible third party with California-based policies. I used to do handbooks for clients. I don't anymore. And the reason for that is not because I hate them, because it's a real chore, but because if I draft a policy, it can be challenged. If you use a policy that's published by a credible third-party company, then it's going to be viewed by the court as presumptively compliant. Like a company like Cal Chamber or the California Employers Association, they all have policies that you can adopt. You just have to make sure they're California-based policies and that they're credible. And if you use their tools and you adopt a policy, then you have to just make sure that your practices match the policies, number one. And if they don't, you need to either modify your practices or determine why that policy maybe doesn't apply to you, and you can modify it. So for example, you can't do that with respect to rest and meal breaks. Rest and meal breaks are what they are. The policy should match what the law says, and your practices should match what the policy says. But some of those programs say things like, we will do performance evaluations after 30 days of employment and then an annual performance review every year. That's not required by law. And if you don't do that, then you should not say in your policies that you are. So when you use these programs, those are the kind of things to look for. Make sure you follow the rules for adopting an alternative workweek schedule, AWS. That includes sending the record of the election to the DIR. Those rules are extremely strict. And if you don't do it exactly right, the entire alternative workweek schedule will be determined to be invalid. And that means the legal effect is that all those hours that people worked over 8 hours when they were working like a 410 schedule, all those extra hours are considered overtime hours, and it can be horrible, very, very expensive. So I actually tell people I would avoid adopting an alternative workweek schedule unless there really is pressure on you to do that. Everything that California has done over the years has been designed to force you to have a very conventional, almost like a factory style workplace. If you have an AWS, know when you still have to pay overtime. Don't send employees home before the end of the adopted schedule time. So a lot of people adopt AWSs and then don't realize that what that means is you have to give that person work from for the entire time that they would work the adopted schedule. So if you adopt a 410, then they should be coming in working 4 days, 10 hours. So if you get done early, let's say you get done after 8 hours and you send the person home, then overtime kicks in. And the reason for that is because they don't want you cheating the employee and not giving them their full regular hours and saving yourself overtime, but also money on the regular time. So just make sure you know what you're doing when you decide you're going to adopt an alternative workweek schedule. If you find a mistake, fix it and have the employee sign an acknowledgement of payment and what it was for. In other words, don't try to get a release of claims because that's not permitted. You're not allowed to force somebody to release claims based on what you already owe them. There's a failure of consideration from a technical legal point of view. That's 30. I want to go back to my first one because I meant to mention with respect to the exemptions. One of the mistakes that I see people make is they pay somebody a salary and they don't realize that there is a minimum salary that they have to pay. And if you don't pay that minimum salary, there is no argument. The exemption is invalid. So be absolutely sure you're paying them. I would pay them a tick above what the required salary is. And now it's in the 70,000. I can't remember the exact amount. But don't make that mistake because it is deadly. I had a client who missed it by $200 every pay period. They paid just $200 less than what was required, and it was declared invalid, and they owed overtime for 4 years. Okay, with that happy thought, let me see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. That was great information. That was a lot. So group, we do have a few minutes left for questions. There's a Q&A feature if you want to enter anything there. We have Sophia in the background here. Have any questions come in yet, Sophia?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. So one is, how should employers handle situations where employees regularly fail to clock in and out for meal periods on shifts over 6 hours, but later claim and fill in a form asking to add their meal period?
Oh, let me make sure I'm following. It sounds like the situation is somebody doesn't clock in and out, but then they, after the fact, say they want to write that into their time card.
Right.
If that's the question, you would want to have them write in their own hand or by email to you or by Slack something documenting why they forgot to clock in and out and confirm. So you're saying you took your full 30-minute meal break before the end of the 5th hour, and they say yes. Do you want to have that documentation in place? If they say no, we just got busy, then pay the missed break premium. But if they confirm that they took their meal break, let them write it in. but have backup that documents that they're writing it in, not because the boss is breathing down their neck saying, you write in that you took a break. You need to make sure that there is a record. And if it keeps happening, try to understand why, what is happening. So don't let it just keep happening. And then you give, like I said before, that second written direction. And this time you make it very self-serving. I'm sending you another copy of our policy because you told me last week that you weren't able to record the start time of your meal break because of X, Y, and Z. That is a performance expectation that you will track your time and you will accurately record the start and stop time of your meal breaks and take it before the end of the 5th hour. If something about work prevents you from doing that, you are to alert your supervisor right away when that happens so that we can evaluate whether we can arrange for coverage so you can take a timely meal break. Like, in other words, you give them I just had this mediation that I had yesterday. I was really pleased because we had a handwritten memo that was written by the supervisor to the employee. She had only been working for the company 2 weeks. And the supervisor wrote, it's been brought to my attention that you reported short meal breaks last week, and we're not sure why. And the employee wrote back and said, I was afraid I'd get in trouble because there's so much work to do. I didn't want to be taking the full 30 minutes when there is, so much that has to get done. She wrote back, don't worry about getting in trouble. Our policy is that you get the full 30 minutes and we want you to take that full 30 minutes. The work will wait. There's no reason. We're not curing cancer. There's no reason you can't take your full 30 minutes. So don't do that anymore. And they paid the missed break premiums. And this is a lady who 3 years later is saying that she didn't get paid all of her, or wasn't provided all of her meal breaks. So it really is beneficial to have it in the person's handwriting or in an email. I had a client recently that got sued, and the company had unbelievably great documentation through Slack. They had a person in payroll whose sole job is to review time cards. It's a big company. And that person reviews time cards. And if they see any anomalies, they would send a Slack message to the employee. Hey, I'm looking at your time card for this pay period. It looks like you forgot to punch out on Friday, the 10th. And the person, oh, my bad, I got done at 4:45. Okay, so I'm going to correct your time card and put that time card in. That is indeed the actual time you stopped. Yes. End of story. There's no argument. The employee is not going to be able to later say that they worked till 5:30. And that, I'll give you an alternative example where it's bad. I had another case where the person in HR, if they saw something wrong with someone's time card, like if they clocked in at 12:28 instead of 12:30, they were handwriting in 12:30. Like they were talking to the employee and saying, why did you clock out at 12:28? Oh, I just was walking by the time clock. I didn't want to walk back, so I just didn't punch my time. And so she changed it in her handwriting. And of course, what's the employee going to say later? I didn't authorize that. I don't know what she's talking about. That's not my handwriting. So the documentation is very important, and the oversight is what you really need to be thinking about, monitoring it.
Okay, perfect. Next question. What if the payroll service we use rounds time for employees to the nearest quarter hour for all time, for regular, overtime, double time? Should all time be clocked to the minute? Does California allow rounding?
No, you can't. You can't do round. I guess you could round it if it's always to the benefit of the employee. Do they do it always to the benefit of the employee? I guess Sophia can't answer that question. So no, do not do rounding anymore. You used to be able to do rounding if Sometimes, they would get the benefit and sometimes the company would get the benefit. Now the courts expect you to determine pay based on what time they actually clocked in.
Next question. What if an employee who is contracted to work 32 hours per week submits PTO requests for 8 hours rather than 6.4 hours that would have been worked that day? Are there any rules, laws, or regulations for this?
Yeah, the PTO should only be applied to the hours that they would work. So if I'm scheduled to work 6.5 hours and I'm taking the day off, I should have 6.5 hours deducted from my bank, not anything more than that. You can have a policy that allows someone to get paid out PTO, like cashed out. That's different. So you could do that. You could say, we'll cash out another hour and a half of your bank. But again, make sure you have it clear in someone's record that the reason why they were docked 8 hours and paid 8 hours on their pay stub was because they requested the day off, 6.5 hours, and they requested to cash out another hour and a half of their PTO. So have that be in their words to you.
And in regards to the posting of the wage order, does it matter if the organization is a smaller operation under 50 employees?
No, everybody's covered by a wage order. So California has wage orders that apply to every business. Some are occupational orders and some are industry orders. And if you use that tool that's on the DIR website called How Do I Determine My Wage Order, it'll walk you through how you figure out which wage order applies to you.
Okay. And do exempt employees need to take a meal break or are they allowed to skip it?
Exempt employees are exempt from rest and meal break requirements.
Perfect. And can you have your timesheet state that employee took lunch and breaks rather than clock in and out? Our timesheet just lists time worked each day.
No, your timesheets, California law requires you to show the start and stop time of work and the start and stop time of meal breaks. You don't have to have a record of the start and stop time of rest breaks, but you do with respect to meal breaks. So it sounds like that person needs to change their time card because that time card is not going to be viewed as compliant and it's not going to help you very much.
And we got down to our final questions. Do employees need to take breaks or can they be opted out? There's a form regarding meal/break rest periods. Some employees do not remember or take breaks. Do the employers need to enforce break periods?
So technically, the obligation of an employer is to provide the opportunity to take the rest and meal breaks according to California law. Technically, you're not required to police people to make sure they actually take their meal breaks. Technically, somebody can sign a missed meal break waiver, and if they work more than 5 but less than 6, they can elect to skip their meal break and not clock out for 30 minutes and extend their day another 30 minutes. I said technically with respect to all 3 of those things because in the old days, I would tell people, you don't have any obligation to ensure that people are actually taking these breaks. You just have to have a good policy that says that this is the requirement and you make sure that work doesn't interfere, that you don't have a manager telling people to work through their meal breaks and things like that. But in the last 2 years, I'm changing my tune. And the reason for that is because I'm dealing with a lot of lawsuits, a lot of wage and hour lawsuits. And if you don't have time cards that show that someone has been clocking out for full 30 minutes before the 5th hour, then the burden is on you to show that you are not violating California law. And it's not so hard with respect to one person, but these lawsuits that I'm dealing with now are class actions. That is what's being filed. And they look for employers that don't have time cards that show the start and stop time of work and show the start and stop time of a 30-minute meal break. So I'm telling people, start making people take them and make sure that people are taking them for a full 30 minutes and that they're taking them before the end of the 5th hour. And make sure that every once in a while, someone actually does work through a meal break. You pay them a missed break premium. And every once in a while, somebody has to work late and you pay them overtime. If you have those features in your records, you're likely going to avoid being a target. But if you have time cards that just say they worked 8 hours and they don't, and I took a 30-minute meal break, you're likely going to get targeted. So the short answer to that last question is you're not required to make people take these rest and meal breaks, technically. My advice is make it your policy and require people to do it. So I'll tell you one last story. I have a client that's a restaurant. Years ago, he came to me and I told him that. I said, I really think restaurants are especially vulnerable. Make people take their rest and meal breaks. I said, you'll notice when you go to like P.F. Chang's or Ruth Chris or one of the big corporate restaurants, the servers will frequently come over and say, I'm getting ready to go on my break, but Kathy here is going to take care of you and get you whatever you need. The reason these big companies are doing it is because they got sued 10 years ago in these class action lawsuits. So now they impose it. So I told my client to do that, to make his employees take a full 30-minute rest break before the end of the 5th hour, make people take 10-minute breaks even when they don't want to leave their tables, schedule it. He did that and he had an uproar. He had a revolt. Employees were so mad. They didn't want to do it. And he called me and said, should I really do this? I mean, people are pissed. And I said, yeah, I would say hold the line. You'll get through it just like the big corporate companies did. So he did. Last year they got sued and we were able to easily dispense with the case because we had good policies. We had record of missed break premiums. We had record of overtime. We had record of correcting people when they didn't take their meal breaks. It put the case to bed very easily. So he was later thanking me for making him go through that pain.
Perfect. And everyone who's joined us today, we have a couple more questions. So if you would like to stick around, please do. Next question. What's a good approach for having remote employees in different states verifying their timesheets? Would an email work?
An email does work, but you'd still need to have the time card. So don't just have someone send you an email saying I worked these hours. Create a time card and have them sign it and scan the signed time card to you every pay period. That's the best way to do it, in my opinion. And then, of course, one of the hard things about remote employees is the time difference. If there is a time difference, you might find that, people in California might be emailing the person and asking questions when it's after 5 in, Chicago. And they reply back, well, they're working. And so you need to be paying attention to those kinds of things and make sure that time is getting recorded and paid, because the argument's going to be that, well, you knew they were working overtime and didn't do anything about it. So you don't want people working off the clock, even if they say, oh, it's no big deal. It was just an email. You tell them, put down the time. That's, and then you pay them overtime. It's cheap. Everybody freaks out about it and says, I don't want to be paying overtime because the person's, sending emails at 9:30. And I say, it is way cheaper to pay the overtime now than to be paying penalties and interest and attorney's fees and legal fees associated with defending a wage and hour claim. And so it is your insurance, is that kind of record. So think of it like a small insurance premium if you have to pay a little overtime or missed break premiums now and then.
Does the meal period need to start at 4 hours and 59 minutes or 5 hours?
It has to start before the 5th hour, so 4 hours and 59 minutes.
We have an on-duty meal period agreement. Are we in trouble?
You're not in trouble, but you should stop probably, because they're very hard to justify, and even harder today than they were 10 years ago. In the old days, if you were like a gas station and you had one guy working, you'd do an on-duty meal period agreement, and the DIR and everybody kind of accepted it. Today, they say you should arrange for him to have a break, arrange for someone to come and cover for, the 10-minute breaks and the 30-minute breaks, or tell him that he can put a sign up and say, I just had that experience. I went to buy gas and I was going to pay cash and went to the store to go in to pay cash. And it had a big sign on that said, store closed temporarily, clerk is on his break. I almost took a picture of it. But that's why people are doing that, is because it's hard to justify an on-duty meal break these days.
Do you recommend employers not do waivers and just pay the meal premiums?
Not do missed break. Well, no, I think the missed break meal waiver is a good thing to have. As long as it says that the person can revoke it at any time, then they're accepted as valid, and that can save you if somebody either didn't take a break or they took a short break when they only worked 6 hours or less. So I would have them. I don't think there's a problem with having them, but they're not a panacea for every missed break. It's just for meal breaks that are skipped or missed between the 5th and the 6th hour of work, if the person's shift ends at 6 hours. So I would get them, but make sure you're not treating them as authority for the person to miss their break or take it late when they're working a longer shift. That's not gonna work. And I do think generally, like I said before, I would enforce the policy and tell people in very frame what you tell people in a way that emphasizes that you're not just trying to comply with the law, but you think it's good for people to take a break and refresh and be relieved of all their duties for 30 minutes. That you're not just doing it because the law requires you to, you're doing it because you think it's good for them and for the company that they do that. So that's how I would speak about it, and I would require it. And if work interferes, I would pay the missed break premium and then tell them next time, come and get me. We'll make sure there's no reason you need to work through your meal break when that happens. I can cover for you. So make sure that if it happens again, you just come talk to me and I'll cover so that you can take your timely meal break. And then you send a little email or even a text that says, just want to reiterate, I want you to be able to take your 30-minute meal break without anybody interrupting you. So next time, come get me. Those are little gems.
Okay, and there's a couple of questions on the 5th hour of work and taking your meal break. Basically, people are asking and seeing online that you can take it before the 5th hour or start before the 5 hours and 59 minutes. So people just want clarification on that.
The law says you have to take a full 30, they have to start their full 30 minutes before the end of the 5th hour. So that's what you have to do.
And regarding signing time cards, will an email that states the hours worked be sufficient enough rather than the signature on a time card?
It's fine as long as there's no argument that it's not real. Like if it's DocuSign, the person has to, actually actively, effectively put their signature in. But if the person is just taking an old form that already has like some printed version of their signature, and every pay period they're filling in new time and then sending the same form, it doesn't carry as much credibility. It's much more credible if the person has to sign in blue ink that they are confirming they've reviewed it and they've signed it. You know what I mean? If you're filling out a form that is already signed, then you're not really actively thinking about what's the content of what I'm confirming here. But when you go to sign something, below a line that says, I have reviewed and I'm confirming that the information above is accurate, it's a lot harder for somebody to later say, well, I didn't really read that. So it's okay. It's better than nothing if it's an electronic signature that someone just reuses and is on a template.
Okay. And can an employee still request to waive their lunch break to leave at their 6th hour?
It needs to be in writing. So they need to request it and have it be approved. I suppose they could do it retroactively, but I would not want to rely upon that. Now, if someone says that they didn't clock out because they decided to skip their break and go home a half an hour early, even though they didn't sign a waiver, then just have them document that. Say, because that's they were provided the opportunity to take it, but they chose not to take it, and that doesn't trigger a missed break premium. So I would document that they told you the next day the reason they didn't clock out for a meal break yesterday was because they only worked 6 hours and they wanted to go home a half an hour early, so they clocked out and decided not to take their meal break. I would just document that.
And Kathy, to add on to that, so if they have the waiver signed, it's all ahead of time, they only work the 6 hours total, then that is
That's
enough.
all
They
you
don't
need.
need to pay the meal premium.
Right. That's all you need. So the scenario that I'm understanding is that someone didn't sign that form. They worked more than 5, but less than 6. So they were owed a meal break, but they left early. They left 30 minutes early instead of taking their meal break. If that's the scenario, then you still don't owe a missed break premium, but you need to have documentation that reflects that the person was provided the opportunity to take 30 minutes, but they elected not to do so for their own personal reasons, and that was because they wanted to go home early. It only works if they left at 12:30 when they were scheduled to work till 1. In other words, it doesn't work if they left at 12:45 because they've missed their meal break. They have to be leaving a half an hour early. But I would document that they told you this and that they, if they left the full 30 minutes early, I would document it and I would give them the form, the missed break meal form, and say, this is fine, but in the future, if you want to do that, you should have this, you should sign this form and give it to me, because you are allowed to do that if you elect to do that. And then you don't have to report it to me and I don't have to document that you left early for that reason.
And then they could work the full 6 hours and there's no premium pay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, down to our last questions. In the construction industry, how can we track 5-minute cool down periods in relation to the penalty pay?
It's a good question. I would have people take their cool down periods at the same time. Like presumably you've got a crew. So I would consider having the foreman or the superintendent or whoever it is, say, let's all do it now. It's really hot out. And then maybe the superintendent, they typically on construction jobs, there's some kind of log. Maybe the superintendent would, put that on the log that it was hot, and he directed everyone to stop at 3:30, and everyone sat in the shade and had water and stuff for 15 minutes, or whatever the time period, document the time. There's no ideal way to track that on a construction site.
Okay,
But that would help.
Wrapping this up, if an employee is traveling during their shift and are sitting passenger, can they request that time to be their lunch break?
Can they request that time to be their lunch break? Well, it kind of depends on why they're in the car. So if they're in the car as a passenger because they have to get to a job site and it's compensable time, then I would say that I would not do that. And the reason for that is because technically the person and anybody who takes a meal break is supposed to be relieved of all duties and able to leave the work premises. But if you're in a car being driven to a job site, you're technically under the control of the employer. And so even though it's the employee's idea, it's a nice idea, it's efficient, but I don't think you can count that as the meal break.
Okay, we got through all the questions. Kathy, thank you so much for staying on all that time. It's great
All
doing
right.
it.
No, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Okay, you can see on the screen, everyone will get a copy of the recording, the email if you registered, and it'll be on our website. So we have recordings of all of the past webinars and registration for future webinars. Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
All right. Thank you.